Good afternoon once again. Sorry for my boring voice for a second time today. May I invite my panelists to come up stage, Mr. Glyn Hughes, Director General TIACA, and I also want to invite Charles. Thank you. Charles is head of alliances at Astral Aviation, Kenya. Okay. Focusing on today, the cargo potential on the continent, and then how are we going to harmonize the potential of this cargo on the continent, then digitalization of cargo operations and investments in the cargo sector, and we look at capacity building, time permitting. The MC was appealing to me to make it as brief as possible since we are running a lot behind time. So we will try our best to do this in a very snappy fashion. So to start with, my guest, I have Mr. Glyn Hughes. As I've said, he is the Director General of TIACA, that is the Global Cargo Association. And then we have Charles, who is from Astral Aviation. So to start with, let me take the first shot from Charles, since he's the local boy, to tell us about what the cargo operations during the last COVID period to now has been like. What has been your experience as a cargo operator?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. So the COVID period has been quite a successful period for us as cargo operators, because with the government shutting down their airspaces, we realized that the only way to get in goods and supplies was through the air. And for us, fortunately, having had the capacity in Africa, we did quite benefit from this. So, and to some extent, we would say our production, rather our turnover, was almost twice as what we did experience pre-COVID. So I'd say it was quite a good season for us, and based on that, we have made quite some strides in terms of enhancing our operations and also increasing our capacity, just based out of the learnings during the COVID period.
But it has been said that a lot of African airlines actually missed out on the cargo boom during the COVID period. What could you think accounted for this?
Now, from what I know in the industry, out of the 15 years of experience I have in the industry, there is not a lot of focus on cargo. Most airlines were looking at the passenger business as being the main revenue driver behind their operations. But when the passenger traffic dried up, what happened is people had to adapt. That's why you see airlines came up with the concept of removing the seats from the aircraft and converting this space into cargo capacity. Unfortunately, as we've seen, most governments within Europe and Asia have banned this kind of operation, because it actually takes a lot longer to load the aircraft, but it just goes to show you the ingenuity which airlines went through during this period to try and meet this demand for the short-term and the long-term operations.
Thank you. Now, Glyn, you operate in the global space, and as Director General TIACA, when COVID struck, ships stopped moving at some point. Airlines became the main source of movement of both loose and bulk cargo across the world, and there was a big shortage. What is the situation today?
That's a great question, and I think it comes back, and I'd like to pick up on something you said to Charles. If anybody leveled accusations that the African carriers didn't move quick enough, that's completely wrong. You know, this continent actually moved much faster than most other continents. Latin America, for example, which has a similar global percentage of air cargo movements, relied fully on bellies, and they had no access to capacity, and there was nothing put in place. So you're absolutely right that when the first aspects of COVID started hitting the global economy, the demand for PPE meant that you couldn't put it on a ship. You know, we were dealing with a virus that was effectively hospitalizing people within days. You can't wait 60 days to have 10 million face masks or gowns or other PPE equipment for hospital workers, frontline staff to actually get access to. So you're quite right, air cargo became the only means to move these things quickly. I'm not going to repeat what Charles has said, but the way that the industry operated here was incredibly effective and still continues to be so. The rest of the world was slightly different. You know, first of all, at the very beginning of the COVID outbreak, there was high demand in China. Then effectively, as the virus moved, there was high demand elsewhere, and China became an exporter. So people who had established route networks and connectivity just leveraged those situations. As we stand today, global demand has eclipsed 2019 levels. And this is one of the challenges. You know, Funke's slide was excellent, and basically, if you looked at that graph, it says that by 2025, global passenger numbers could be back up to 2019 level, and therefore passenger connectivity and route networks. Air cargo is already above 2019 levels. Demand eclipsed 2019 levels. So by 2025, we could be 25% higher than we were in 2019, which means there will be a continued strong reliance on freighters and a further demand for even more aggressive liberalization. Fifth freedom is excellent for passenger and for belly cargo, but seventh freedom is really what's critical for the flexible, agile use of freighter networks.
Wow. So globally, we are looking at capacity or the actual business of cargo far exceeding passenger.
Yes, unfortunately, the cargo industry is a phrase that if somebody sneezes somewhere in the world, air cargo catches a cold. So with whatever happening in Europe, the price of fuel, of course, that impacts the whole sector, but it also impacts the consumer. With the money that they're putting in their gas tank, filling their car, they're not spending on renews, telephones, televisions, other consumable goods which will fly by air, etc. There's now a risk of potential recession in certain zones, certain countries. So all of these are potentially negative aspects for air cargo going forward. But on the plus side, if you go into almost any major retailer in the US or Europe, there's empty shelves. Inventory levels are still very low. There's still a high demand for e-commerce goods. There is still, in most parts of the world, there's still economic growth. So air cargo has, and can continue to look forward to a very progressive and growth year this year and for the subsequent years. Overall capacity is still not back to 2019 levels. In fact, it's taken a dip recently as passenger numbers increase. If you take a beautiful 787, I love it in cargo environment. The cargo has a nice big window to look out of when it's sitting in the cabin. I like that. But when that capacity is deployed on cargo-only routes, you can get 40 to 45 tons. When you put seats in and you fill them with passengers, okay, passengers are nice, they earn money for the airline, but the cargo payload is now reduced to 15 to 20 tons. So in many respects, the recovery of the passenger side makes the cargo industry suffer from even more reduced capacity.
But it would appear that even today, many African airlines are still not giving cargo priority. What would be your advice to them?
Well, I think that's another great question. We've seen a lot of airlines around the world reprioritize their portfolio. If you look at the post-global financial crisis, 28-29, from that point up until effectively February or March 2020, the passenger industry grew 5% a year everywhere. It was a straight line vertical growth. Many people who joined this industry had 10 years of nothing but growth. Airlines had a strategic plan in place. Air cargo was going up and down. And in fact, in the 3 years prior to COVID, air cargo was stagnating because we had trade disputes between the US and China, between the US and the EU and China. There was talk of the end of globalization. Harley-Davidson said they can no longer manufacture motorbikes in the US. They were going to start manufacturing them in China as their growth market. So you were looking at a very difficult time for air cargo. And now, of course, it's completely different. The bounce back, the recovery was a vertical V. And going forward, I think the global economy is very strong. And airlines are consequently looking at how they can rebalance their fleets. In some cases, some airlines are actually looking at that slow recovery of passenger traffic in some areas and saying, well, let's take some of those aircraft and actually put them through conversion programs. So we're seeing a very full backlog of conversion programs. You know, the manufacturers have got some great, you know, some big freighters out there, some very aggressive and innovative airlines, such as the gentleman to my left, are actually looking at market niches and getting some great aircraft to fill all demands.
You are doing some really good job, and I think COVID came to you as more as a blessing than as a curse to most of us and to most of the passenger operators. Now, you really took advantage of all that COVID brought with in terms of cargo, and you moved your business up. Now, the UNECA says that if the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is implemented, intra-Africa trade is likely to grow by about 52% from the current 17% within the space of 3 years. Now, where would Africa find the capacity to actually move these goods around?
Good. Now, I think as cargo airlines, we have responded positively to this calling, and I look at
To build a plant to manufacture phones, for example, and then say, oh, by the way, we don't have any air connectivity, they won't build a factory there. So you have to be able to demonstrate you've got capability. You then have to actually invest in that, but it is a little bit of what do you do first? Do you build the infrastructure, or do you get the investment? You actually have to build the infrastructure, because without that infrastructure, you won't get the investment in for the production. So you have to identify, do we build, for example, flower exporting facilities in a country that doesn't have the capability to produce flowers? No. So you look at what the national capabilities are, you then design an infrastructure plan around that, you make sure that you've got support from carriers, and then that there are some innovative aspects, because you talked about financing. I think you do need to look at donor organizations as well. I think you have to work through the World Bank. I think you have to work through the World Economic Forum. You have to work through the EU. A lot of these have a fund set aside to support, whether or not it's a PPP, public-private partnership, or a complete investment. But the value creation from the right facilities are excellent. Equally, the wrong facilities can be counterproductive.
Looking back at the example of during the COVID period, Nairobi is one of the few hubs with an excellent cold chain facility. However, if you look at the countries around us, this is not the case. So during our pitches, when we were going to pitch to governments, one of the things we were doing is we were actually marketing the Nairobi airport as an excellent cold chain storage facility, which could act also as a redistribution hub for the... It's only unfortunate that we only have 3 airports in Africa with this kind of capacity, but we are fortunate also as a country to have this capability, and we are actually actively selling it out to other countries and other airlines as well.
Now, the other thing is that in Africa, when you look at cargo, it's often a side that is not given as much attention as the passenger side in terms of investments. Now, cargo is going very digital and modernized. What do we need to do to get our cargo to that level?
The best way to digitalize any process is to make sure people like me, who have been in this industry far too long, are replaced by 10 and 11-year-old children. Because I've never seen anything like there is at my house at every Christmas. When we open up something electronic, I look for the handbook, the manual, the guide, and I'm still scrabbling around looking for it, saying, oh, there's something wrong, they haven't put the handbook in here. Meanwhile, my kids have connected it and they're playing. And we have to take that same approach. We don't need to kind of over-complexify things. You know, nowadays we often use WhatsApp, we use Instagram or whatever the latest social media tool is. We don't have to know how it works. We have to focus on the benefit that we get from using it. And I think that's what we have to do as an industry. We have to say, we have a problem, we need to share information, we need to have access to booking, to access to capacity, to access to tariffs and rates, etc., access to customs and border procedures, so that we can actually clear goods before they actually arrive. And we don't need to know how it works, we just need to have those communities design those solutions based on what we all need, which is fast and effective information exchange and border management.
But we will require some regulatory changes to be able to do some of these things.
Yes, I mean, and this is one of the sad things that when the Chicago Convention or the Montreal Convention was actually written, it was written by two people. The person that wrote, more than two, but there were two groups. The person that wrote the passenger side nicely wrote, you need evidence of a contract. The person that wrote the cargo bit said, you need paper evidence of a contract. Just putting the word paper in there has meant that we had to spend over a decade trying to get governments then to adopt the various protocols which would facilitate the removal of paper. Unfortunately, you then have customs procedures and other government agencies who have already embedded paper in their process. So again, we do have to take a radical approach and say, if I've got fresh cut flowers, which are going to take 36 hours to get cleared for export, that's 15% loss of value. That market's going to disappear. It's going to go to another country which can actually get the flowers out in a quicker time frame. So that's where, again, governments have to look at how can they maximize the value for their economy. And again, we talked a lot earlier about government pockets. You know, it's much better to put money in the government pocket based on exporting value products, which are generating value for your country, rather than exporting taxes. Exporting taxes, I don't think there's any government around the world that have said, that's the way for financial freedom for my country, is more taxes. No, that is the way to actually make it more difficult, and as Funke presented previously, and as you said, we have to move away from that and get value chains and value creation. Governments need to be instrumental in that.
Charles, do you think it's going to be easy for Africa to actually modernize our cargo processes with what you know?
Well, we might be a bit late to the party, but it's still on time. I think this is still the right time to adopt the digitization of paperwork, because one of the things I see globally when I travel is companies are actually adopting blockchain technology to improve authenticity of documentation. It doesn't make any sense where your product has to wait at the airport for 2 or 3 days while you're waiting for a change of manifest to be brought in from another country. Through adoption of modern technology, I think we're able to surmount these challenges, and I think just speaking for us as a local airline, we have woken up to this challenge, and what we're doing is we're using the local avenues, for example, Kenya Private Sector Alliance, to engage the government to try and change its mindset in terms of the use of the old form of working. And I can say gladly we have a government that is responsive and that is adopting the digital transformation agenda. And for us, it has worked very well, I think, for us in this country.
But I've heard from airlines, sorry, just one moment, that cargo, unlike passenger, doesn't complain. So it can be stuck at the airport there. I mean, it will go when it will go. You lunch, you don't need to take it to the hotel. It's dump day. So why do we have to modernize?
Again, you know, some cargo complaints, if you're moving livestock, I don't think you want to keep that livestock hanging around and saying, oh, I won't give it food or water. But again, it comes back to value and what do you want to create? You know, air cargo that spends more time sitting on the ground brings no value. And if you want a good comparison, I always, and again, sorry for bringing up my children, but I did recommend to my children once that we should go on holiday like air cargo. And they said, oh, what's that, Dad? And I said, well, you turn up to the airport 5 days before you want to fly. You fly, you spend 1 day on the beach there, and you have to turn up at the airport again for 5 days before you come home. And then when you come home, you wait at the airport for 4 days before somebody comes and picks you up. That's not acceptable. And yet that's the reality, because effectively, governments haven't looked at the value. And if you think that the value of that cargo that's moving, as we said earlier, $6.4 trillion, in fact, it's over $7 trillion now, is the value of that cargo. And just coming back to the digital aspect, in Africa, I think you should also be proud of what you have done, leading the world in, for example, here in Kenya, the e-wallet. You know, I spent a lot of time in the US. If those of you who haven't been to the US, they use something called checks, where you have to write all this information on a piece of paper. They don't even verify who they are, and then it takes 3 or 4 weeks by the time it goes through the system, etc., before the money is considered cleared. And that is just not an efficient way. The e-visa, my e-visa to get here, it took 2 hours, verifiable with a QR code. In many other countries, it is again, it's a 2-3 week process for a piece of paper. So the digital capability is here. The digital willingness to apply it to our particular aspect is not yet there. So how do we get that willingness? Is again, we reinforce the value add and the benefit of having high-value cargo exports leaving a country and the money that it can actually generate.
But I think until we get leaders like the age of your children, I'm sure we would have challenges in Africa, because if we have the leaders we have and trying to change them, get them to appreciate technology and help us to digitalize cargo, it could take us forever, because they will never appreciate it. Would they? Charles, what do you think?
All right, gladly some of us are just within that age band. So how we look at it is, remember this cargo belongs to someone, right? And with the advent of competition, you really have to be responsive to the client's needs. So what we're doing as organizations is we are creating then a sort of revenue management system. Yes, there's a lot of demand, but also the capacity to cover that demand is limited. So we're asking clients, okay, you have this shipment, you have this urgency about it, are you willing to pay a premium for it? And in most cases, you'll find, in this case, with the COVID period, most organizations were willing to pay that premium, and we move the cargo as fast as possible. Yes, the cargo will not complain, however, the customer will complain by moving his shipment away. So the onus is on us to be a bit more creative in how we respond to cargo challenges, and what products are we bringing to the market to help move shipments faster, because to us also it's to our advantage to make sure this shipment moves instead of it waiting for capacity, which then we deploy elsewhere and are not making the money here.
Thank you for that. Let me shift the subject slightly a bit towards capacity building. We said that the potential for cargo in Africa is enormous. It's going to grow globally and particularly in Africa. Now, do we really have the manpower to support the growth going forward? Charles?
Yes, we do. I think I just look at it from the prism of the advancements in technology, especially within the region. We have so many apps which have come up that offer last mile delivery services. We as airlines are also responding to this by partnering with these digital companies to offer that sort of last mile delivery. And I'm also looking at the band of the generation we are in right now as Africa. We have a lot of young people, a lot of energetic people who are willing to produce or to go the mile to get what we require. And through that, I'd say there's a lot of potential within our generation to deliver this, and also to respond to the needs going forward.
And if I could just add, this is a global issue. A global issue is a lack of ability to get staff into the industry. The trucking industry, there's about a shortage of 400,000 truck drivers in the US, over 200,000 shortage in Europe. Warehousing staff in many ground handling facilities around the world have 100% turnover during the course of the year. And I think Charles has just highlighted one of the key things. I've been in this industry a long time. It's nearly 4 decades. I've never encountered any industry that impacts civilization as much as, I'm going to say commercial aviation, but inside I'm saying air cargo. You know, air cargo saves lives, it grows economies, it connects. We see it during COVID, we saw how it saves lives, and this is the message we have to get across to that next generation. This industry is not about moving a box from place A to place B. It's about the impact of what's inside that box it has on the recipient. Whether or not it's my kids getting the latest iPhone 16 minutes after it's produced somewhere in China, or through an organ transplant, or PPE, or life-saving medicines, or flowers on Mother's Day, or flowers on a wedding anniversary, or sadly flowers the day after the wedding anniversary because I forgot the wedding anniversary. Whenever you need the commodities that impact lives, air cargo's touched it. And if we can get that message to that next generation and tap into these innovators, And again, this continent is full of innovators, of people playing around with the technology and creating cool stuff. We've got to bring them in, and that's where, again, you'll see an acceleration of change.
Thank you very much.